What's up, Flannelverse? We are back for the Christmas 2-game slate, and I have a guest here. You cannot see him on the screen, but he is here. You'll be able to hear his voice in a minute. I have downside of me, aka Forsaken, aka Hess, aka Jesse, is here with me to break down the slate. He is a DFS pro, great player, and should provide a lot of insight on this slate. Jesse, how are you doing today?
Good. I'm more awake than I would have been if the show started when I thought it started, so that's probably good for everybody.
Jesse apparently does not know when Eastern time is relative to where he is, which, I mean, do you not in Canada, do you not just hear Eastern time all the time and not know the time difference between yourself and East Coast?
I'm used to it being 2 hours, which is like how it was before. I don't know. I just thought it was always 2 hours, and it's 2 hours half the time, and then 1 hour the other half because we don't
so you're
change
like in like I think like Ann Arbor has that kind of time zone split too, where it's doesn't follow the standard.
Well, we don't change our time here, so everyone else moves it around, and we don't. So.
All right, we are getting some pushback already, as expected. Ricky wants to know where the video is. Yeah, I tried to warn you guys. We're not going to get video of Jesse today, but we will get his insights. So we're going to be going as usual, position by position. We do not have updated ownership. There are some sites that have updated ownership, so we can talk about kind of what's expected. But we don't have ownership on the screen. Lamar Jackson is the highest projected quarterback on the slate at 8,000. Jesse, do you have a feel on how much Lamar you're going to be playing?
Well, I haven't made any lineups yet. I'm guessing Lamar would probably still going to be like my highest owned quarterback of the four. He's so much better than the other guys, and there are some cheap options that we'll get to eventually. Like the salary is kind of restricting, even though it is only a 2-game slate. So it is kind of hard to like make teams with him, but he is still coming in. I have the Blitz projection ownership is up. The RG stuff isn't up, but the Blitz has ownership, and he's 41% on there. So also, I'm assuming I can just tell people that stuff. I'm sure Derrick Carty won't kill me, but yeah.
Yeah, I've basically been given the direction that I can like briefly look at the Blitz stuff, but I don't have like any kind of deal with Derrick Carty specifically, so I don't want to like really keep it up on the screen for long. But yeah, I think that's fine to just shout that out. I think that's similar to what I've seen elsewhere in terms of ownership projection for Lamar. That's actually like 9% higher than what I've seen elsewhere for Lamar's ownership projection, which makes a little bit of a difference. It really is like I want to play him in every lineup that I can, but like you said, it's going to be tough with the rest of your lineup just because he's so expensive. We don't have like that great of value options. I don't know that I get much more than that. I'm probably right around the field on Lamar. As far as the matchup goes over the past 5 weeks, it has been pretty a nice matchup, like top 12 or so matchup for quarterbacks against Houston, mostly through the air, kind of neutral on the ground for quarterbacks against Houston. Ultimately, though, Lamar's just averaging like 26.6 fantasy points per game over the past 5 weeks. Obviously, looks pretty great. The second highest projected quarterback on the slate is Patrick Mahomes against Pittsburgh. It's been a little bit of a better matchup than usual in recent weeks against Pittsburgh. And now Joey Porter Jr. is out. Is that something that you're going to factor in at all, Jesse? Joey Porter Jr. being out, like, seems like it makes it a little bit of an easier matchup for Patrick Mahomes. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, sorry. It helps him out a little bit, but I've never been too big of like a matchup guy. I've always been more of like the defense is like a collective unit in their scheme. And so, there are players that can shut down receivers and do a better job. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it's not as significant as like someone would make it out to be. There'd be very few exceptions. Like Patrick Surtain would be like one where I would be like, okay, like that one matters. But I'm not really too like, it doesn't really change my outlook on the Steelers defense that much that Joey Porter's out.
See, I think I factored in slightly more than you do, just from the standpoint of, I think Joey Porter is like one of those top cornerbacks in the league. And then it's just like the downgrade from one of the top cornerbacks in the league to a backup, like, can be pretty massive. And I don't really know much about the backup cornerbacks on the Steelers, but I think it's at least like on a 2-game slate, like on a main slate, I agree with you. Like, not something effect, but on a 2-game slate where you're just trying to find like any edge you can, I think that's enough that I'm like, okay, it makes me a little bit more interested in the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. I was kind of ready to write him off, but I'm like, You can kind of see it, I guess, if they just attack the backup and the backup really is atrocious in this game. You can kind of see it getting there.
Yeah, with the smaller slates for sure, you're definitely digging in for every little edge you can. And this is kind of anecdotal because I haven't looked at the Pittsburgh injury reports or anything like that, but I know that I don't know if Porter was the one they lost, but I know they were already kind of thin in the secondary. They were talking about playing guys that like had barely played at all. And
Right.
if that was before Porter got injured, then they could be like extremely thin compared to like what their season like average or like their normal defense looks like in terms of their corners.
Right.
But yeah, again, I haven't looked at the injury report, so that could be a little bit of a misleading shout. But
Yeah, no, I think that's, like you said, worth noting. And it's like, it's still over the past 5 weeks, still a not great matchup, but it's not even like bottom 10 in the league. It's like slightly below average matchup for quarterbacks over the past 5 weeks. So kind of interesting. Then we have CJ Stroud is 6,000. No Tank Dell in this one, playing against the Ravens, who earlier in the year had been really bad against quarterbacks in passing games. Recently, not so bad. Fourth over the past 5 weeks, or fourth worst matchup for quarterbacks in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed over the past 5 weeks. I think there might be some noise there, but I don't know how much interest you have in CJ Stroud.
well, I actually have CJ Stroud projected better than Mahomes, but the other thing is with the Ravens secondary is they or their defense as a whole is like they were giving up a lot of yards and specifically a lot of yards passing, but they were also just a lot of those games early in the season they were getting ahead 20 30 points like with a lot of time left. And if you were looking at them just at like EPA or like a per play basis or whatever, their defense, their pass defense was more like in the middle of the pack than like at the bottom, where if you looked at like something like DraftKings like pass yards allowed or something like that, like really basic stuff, it was like, yeah, they're getting torched every game, but when the other team has to pass for 3/4, then yeah, you're going to allow more yards than normal. So I always thought that they were kind of getting underrated in a way, and maybe now it's kind of swinging the other way. But either way, the defense has been really solid, and they're really healthy compared to like a lot of teams, which is significant at this part of the season. But still, like Stroud is still a phenomenal quarterback, and Nico Collins is the best receiver like in his own tier. So just having this like such an easy quarterback and wide receiver one pairing, and his yards prop is basically right where Mahomes is. Not that that's like, everyone's got different projections, but just as like kind of a neutral way to evaluate it. It's like he's basically neck and neck with Mahomes yards wise. And I expect Houston is way more likely to be trailing than Kansas City is. So I think I like Stroud and Wilson. We'll get to Wilson, but I like those two more than I like Mahomes, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, so I had Stroud as my second favorite also. Yeah, Mahomes and Wilson I have kind of as a toss up. Stroud also, like, he's a bit cheaper than Mahomes. I think with Tank Dell being out, like the pass catchers all become a little bit more appealing. So like at cost, I think Dalton Schultz is fairly inexpensive. John Mechie pretty inexpensive. So like the stack I think is a little bit easier than the Mahomes stacks, just because it's quite kind of a mess with Hollywood Brown making his return to the team, and they're all kind of priced up more than they were last week. I don't know. So yeah, I think I'm with you. Stroud over Mahomes. But you like Russ over Mahomes also, even in sort of a tough matchup, but he's only 5,500 on a slate where maybe those savings matter to you. What do you like about Russ?
Yeah, like I guess all these quarterbacks kind of have like other than Lamar, they all kind of have similar rushing upside. But I just think like Russell Wilson, we had those two games. I'm kind of thinking of it more like from like the whole field's perspective, and on these types of slates, the casual players are going to make up like a larger number than on a typical slate, like especially like a Christmas type thing. I just think people are like Russell Wilson's just a tough click. George Pickens is his only receiver, and who knows how healthy he is. For me, I'm not worried about his health. If they're saying he's a full go, he's a full go, but people are going to have a hard time going there. He's kind of expensive, but Russell Wilson isn't. He has good rushing upside. You expect them to be trailing in this game, and they're playing like they need to win to secure the division. They need to win out basically. So I just think that the other guys are all going to come in way more owned than he is, and on such a small slate that kind of leverage can add up. And you can do things with Wilson that you can't do with the other guys. You can definitely do like a Henry Mixon type move, which is really hard to do with the other quarterbacks. And you can even if you don't like Pickens, you can do like a really cheap like Wilson and Freiermuth. Hope Wilson throws one to him, runs one in, and that'll be more than enough at his price.
Yeah, and I think like to your point, like I think people sometimes on small slates they still talk about like, oh, he doesn't have the upside. Like, oh, Russell Wilson doesn't have the upside that you need to win a GPP. But it's really about the upside of your lineup. So like if you play Russ, like you said, you can get to the Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, pay up for all of the other players that do have the upside to really elevate your lineup. And if Russ puts up 12 and Lamar Jackson puts up 20, well, that 8-point difference might not be as much as the difference that you can get from playing Nico Collins and Joe Mixon and Derrick Henry or whatever else it is. So I'm with you. I think that Russ is pretty interesting. You don't necessarily need him to even have massive upside to pay off here. On that note, though, Daniel Tino asks, how much salary on average would you leave on the table with this kind of slate? And that's something that I always struggle with, Jesse. I don't know if you are somebody who has, I've kind of started setting a max salary cap often on 2-game slates, depending on what the slate looks like. But it's not something that I did prior to this year at all. So I'm curious if that is something that you do, if you have any thoughts on like how much you would set your salary cap at.
Right. Well, first, I'm just going to touch on one other thing with Wilson. Like, I really hope that people are over the whole a quarterback needs to have upside thing. The last 2 Millie Maker winners were Mac Jones and then Michael Penix was 7 points. Like, yeah. Okay, like the rest of your lineup matters quite a bit. And the whole this guy doesn't have the upside thing is just these guys are all in the NFL. Like, realistically, like they all do have some level of upside.
Sure.
And especially a quarterback like Russell Wilson, he's got a rushing upside. He's more than talented enough to get there for you. So for max salary, you kind of like I do usually on a slate this size, I will set a max salary. But the other thing you want to consider, especially if you're an optimizer bro and not a sim bro, is looking at building maybe get through all your settings, set everything up like you would, run 150 lineups or 300 or whatever, and then look at the projected ownership that those are coming in at. And another way to make your lineups more unique is to cap out your max projected ownership, so that you're not just like arbitrarily losing lineups by like, oh, I'm going to cut everything at 49.5. And there could be a really unique 49.9 that you just completely left off the table by doing that. So instead of, setting one bar like too low or whatever, I would say to find a number that you like. Maybe you want to do 49.8 and then an ownership number that will also help you get unique rather than, setting your salary way too low and then you're just building bad teams.
Yeah. Rather than being too restrictive with your salary, maybe just have like try to avoid the 50,000 because you don't want to have those are often going to be pretty duped, but also you don't need to set it really low if you do make other differences. Like you said, setting a cap on ownership. I think that's a good call out. Any other thoughts on quarterbacks?
No. Well, I was gonna say one other thing with Russell Wilson too is like you can't really do Mixon, Henry, and Collins with like the other quarterbacks, and you can do those three with Wilson. So that is like another upside to being interested in the Russell Wilson stack, because you can get all three of the high projected skill players, and if you can make up enough of the difference at quarterback, then you can give yourself a leg up there.
Yep. Good call. All right. Let's move on. Talk about running backs. So at the top, we've got Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon. I don't know if you feel the need to find a favorite between the two of them, because those two are like clearly in a league of their own. Just looking at the projections, there is a 9-point gap between Joe Mixon and the next best projected running back, at least at Roto Grinders. So let's start with Henry and Mixon. Actually, let's do team by team. I think it's kind of easier to go team by team. Sure. So Derrick Henry, let's start there. We have Justice Hill out, which could open things up a little bit on the Ravens. Not sure if that's all going to go to Derrick Henry, if Keaton Mitchell's going to finally make an appearance, if it's going to be Rasheen Ali. But let's start with the Derrick Henry part of things. How are we feeling about Derrick Henry at 8,200?
Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry, price wise on a normal slate or whatever, it's not that appealing of a spot. But with only 2 games, he's the highest priced or the highest projected running back and like the second highest projected skill player. the Ravens have like the highest team total, and they're projected to be winning. So those are all good things for Henry. And on top of that, with Justice Hill out, there's going to be more plays I would assume that Henry will be on the field for that he wouldn't have been on the field for. Now, that being said, I do fully expect Keaton Mitchell to play in this game and be the backup running back. Rasheen Ali is a special teams player mostly, which is why he's been active over Keaton Mitchell in the other games, because they would just basically 50-50 at Hill and Henry, and then Ali would get a snap or two randomly and then play special teams. So just due to the roster crunch, Keaton Mitchell hasn't been active. He's been healthy, but I would expect him to play. And while he's not really that interesting for the main slate, Keaton Mitchell, he is kind of interesting in Showdown if you are going to build into some like Ravens onslaught teams. I wouldn't expect him to play enough to matter on the for a 2-game slate, but yeah, Derrick Henry is going to be a slam for me.
Yeah. So you would not play. So that's one that I'm like, I think that'll probably have a little bit of exposure to Keaton Mitchell on the main slate, just because he is so inexpensive. And like with Justice Hill being out, do you think there's any possibility that he just takes on the Justice Hill role like completely? Like if they ever did get to a situation where they want to be throwing the ball, he takes on that role. I know that they're favored, so it's not the best game script for it, but like, I don't know. Justice Hill has had a pretty good role and he's out, and I don't think Derrick Henry can fill it. So I don't know. You think you're probably not going to have any Keaton Mitchell?
Yeah, I'm not certain that he's going to get like. I would expect Ali would probably get some of the passing down work, and also they could look to other formations, like just running more double tight end stuff and 3 wide receivers with 2 tight ends. They don't really necessarily need to have a back in the backfield, so they could look to make up the difference other ways than just having Justice Hill in there, or like Keaton Mitchell in there for Justice Hill's role. But it is definitely possible. He played a lot coming down the stretch a year ago. It was a year or two. There's so many. All these guys have had like so many season-ending injuries that it's hard to keep track of what years they were actually playing in at this point. Like with him, Dobbins, and Gus Edwards. But it definitely is possible. And the unknown is a spot where you could definitely take on some risk and go for it, especially on a 2-game slate or on the Showdown slate. But yeah. It seems a little thin for me for the 2-game slate.
So I think the reason that I have some interest in it is because I think this could be, and I said this on Saturday, this could be just a slate where none of the running backs are that great, just because all of the matchups are so tough. Of course, Derrick Henry had a great game, but like nobody else really had a great game on Saturday. And I think that this one is another game where it's like another slate where it could be pretty gross, because we got the Kansas City guys splitting carries in a tough matchup with Pittsburgh. We have the Pittsburgh guys splitting carries in a tough matchup with Kansas City. Joe Mixon has kind of a tough matchup with the Ravens. I don't know, just like, so because like the point that you need, the barrier to entry to being like a good running back on this slate is so low that just like if Keaton Mitchell just like has a 40-yard reception and then does a little bit more, that might be enough at his price tag because of what it allows you to do with the rest of your lineup. So it's sort of like the Russ kind of argument where it's like, I don't necessarily need him to have massive upside. I just need the lineups that he's in to give me that upside that other people are not reaching if he's low owned. So I think in like large field GPPs, I think he's playable, but only those contests. Jesse, I see that Major League Baseball All-Star Justin Steele is in the chat, who also, by the way, put Jesse on his Mount Rushmore of Twitter personalities. So good to see Justin Steele in the chat. He did, however, say he is going to riot since you are not on camera. So how do you feel about Christmas Eve riots?
I mean, you got the whole family together. You can make it a whole event. Like it's not a lot going on. A lot of the stores will be closed too, so you're not going to run into like a lot of confrontation if you're going to go do something like that. Light something on fire or whatever. I feel like it's a good time for that. To honestly, like,
I thought you might be pro rioting on Christmas Eve. That does not surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Okay. So go start that riot, Steele. Jesse will enjoy it.
Well, you should probably like stick around for the rest of the show and then do that
after the show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Justin, I think you bank on the Baltimore game being high scoring and take the running backs from it with their pass catching upside. Yeah. So some interest in Keaton Mitchell there. All right. So outside of Baltimore, then we have Mixon against Baltimore. He is 7,700, projects just a little bit behind Derrick Henry. I'm not that interested in anybody else on Houston. You can let me know if you do have interest in Agumbawale or something. But we can start with Mixon. How much interest do you have there?
Yeah, Mixon for me is probably going to be like the one expensive guy that I'm not that interested in playing. Like if you gotta at some point with your 150, like you're going to end up underweight on one of them at least, and Mixon's probably going to be the spot for me. Last year, as the season kind of winded down, he seemed kind of washed, and I feel like we're kind of getting the same thing this year, where like he's kind of slowing up a little bit. He had a big start to the year, but the team dynamic has changed quite a bit as well. They had a lot of soft games, soft running spots at the start of the year, and they also had 3 borderline Pro Bowl caliber receivers. Now they only have 1. So the defense can afford to pay more attention to Mixon in terms of like stacking the box and stuff like that. He does have all the pass catching upside, so it's not like the game script is going to break him or anything like that. But I just feel like out of the expensive guys, he's the one that I'm the least interested in. So that's probably a good sign for anyone in here that likes him. But for me, I'm off of him. And yeah, the other 2 running backs, they just don't get involved enough that unless Mixon got hurt, they're not really worth considering.
Jesse, it's extra impressive how many GPPs you win, given that you run so poorly and nobody can tell you because you run so bad, and yet you win GPPs all the time. It's an interesting dynamic that you've got going on there. Yeah, I think I'm with you. I was more into Mixon than Henry on Saturday. I'm not sure that I'm more into Mixon on this one. I think probably Henry is the better play here. Drew said it's party time. Should we surprise on stream today? I actually thought about sending you guys the link to potentially surprise me, and then I realized I have a hard out on this one, so I just did not have the time. So we're gonna have to save the stream, the party stream with everybody. Invite Jesse on one of those for another time. But we got a good question from Jeffrey. Asked, would you play Lamar and Henry in the same lineup? And I gotta say, I kind of went over this with Scott Barrett on our last stream on the Fantasy Points channel, and we looked at the fantasy point report, weekly fantasy point scoring, just to look at the correlation between them. And it's not as negative as I kind of expected it to be. Like there have been games where Lamar is 26, Henry has 30, Lamar has 34, Henry, like they're not that negatively correlated. So I think it's okay to play them together. How do you feel about it, Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, they're not that negatively correlated. And on top of that, Derrick Henry might score 15 points and blow every other running back out of the water on this slate still. Yeah. So yeah, on like a bigger slate, maybe you don't want to put Lamar with Henry because he's rarely going to pass to him. Although tomorrow may be the exception to that if Henry steps into Hill's role a little bit more. But on a traditional slate, you probably would avoid that pairing. But on a 2-game or on a showdown, I would not worry about that at all.
Yep, same page. Now, interestingly, Jaylen Warren is the next best projected running back on the slate. And I guess he has a better projection at fantasy points. If we look at the projections, he has a projection for 11.4 fantasy points. So actually more than 2 fantasy points better than the 4th best. It's a little bit closer at Roto-Grinders. But Warren, the snaps have been really strong in recent weeks. Whereas pull up the snap share report. How much interest do you have in Warren and or Najee Harris?
Yeah, so I'll just answer Justin's question first. I expect Keaton Mitchell to be active. He's just been inactive because he doesn't play special teams, and Ali does, which is why he hasn't been active the last few weeks. So Jaylen Warren, his snap share has been really interesting. That it's just swung completely his way after being 50-50, or Najee's been leading the backfield. The ownership that I have in front of me here still has Warren and Harris split pretty evenly, which is surprising to me. And if that is the case tomorrow, I would be just super interested in playing a ton of Warren and no Najee, given their roles, given that he correlates better with Russ and given that they're expected to lose. That being said, if the ownership shows more of a lean towards Warren, then I think you could take some shots on Najee Harris, getting his role, or that the script flips and you play Najee without Wilson, and you just hope that they're playing from ahead, or it's a tight game the whole time, and he falls in the end zone once or twice. I feel like he's still going to be the 1 yard line type guy if they get to that point or whatever, like right near the goal line, that he could fall into the end zone, catch a couple passes, and like we talked about on the slate with the running backs, 10 or 11 points out of him, that might be good enough, and a touchdown is 6 of that already. But just speaking on just their roles, Jaylen Warren has definitely taken on way more of a lead back role than we would have expected, and if the ownerships are close, then I think Warren is a great play. I slammed him last Saturday, and I'll probably do the same again this week.
Yeah, I think I like them both. Also, Warren, like you said, just looks great. You look at expected fantasy points over the past 3 weeks. Warren 45, 15 per game to just 28 for Najee Harris. But like you said, just like one touchdown changes everything on a 2-game slate, and Najee probably more likely to get those goal line looks. They're projected not that different in ownership, in the one place that I can find that has ownership projections.
Yeah.
They're within 10% in terms of projected ownership, which is probably a good number, about where it should be. It is interesting. Najee 43 carries to Jaylen Warren's 25. It's just the passing work is so much more impactful on PPR like DraftKings. So yeah, I think Warren the preference, but I think Najee is somebody that I'm going to have some interest in also. And then who have we not talked about? We haven't talked about the Chiefs yet, have we?
Yeah, we haven't gotten to the Chiefs yet. I was gonna say with the Steelers backs too, it's like a weird bubble we're in, where it's like we're looking at all these things. It's like, oh, Warren and Harris are projecting pretty close to even, and like obviously in that situation you'd love to slam Warren, but it's like if everyone thinks like that, and we see what happened last week, Warren was on the field so much, he was catching a lot of passes. It really does feel like Warren should be a lot higher on than Najee, but the numbers aren't really reflecting that. So I guess I never. It's one thing I really struggle with in DFS is like how many people are looking at the same stuff I'm looking at, and like how should I act on that? It's like I used to always assume everyone knew what I knew, and that's definitely not the way to approach it. But I don't know where the line is,
especially on a Christmas slate. I think this is one where it's like even more casual people going to play than usual, just like something to people want to win $1 million on Christmas, or 200,000, whatever it is. Like they just want that shot at a Christmas miracle. So I think a lot more people play on these types of slates, and a lot more casual people, and they probably going to lean more towards Najee just for the season long stuff. But yeah, I agree. It's ownership. I don't envy whoever has to do ownership projections, because really tough to know how the field is going to play things. But if they had the same ownership, then we would just be jamming Jaylen Warren, but probably going to be a little bit of a difference at least. I don't know. Tough to know exactly. The Chiefs backs. So actually, I didn't look at how it felt like Kareem Hunt got the majority of the work last week. But it's been kind of like over the past 3 weeks, if we look at the Chiefs, and I'm not sure like week to week if it's going to be consistent, but over the past 3, I pulled up 2023 because I was looking at Keaton Mitchell stuff.
I can tell you last week Hunt led them in snaps and whatnot last week. I know that for sure. Okay.
Yeah, actually I've got the week to week stuff pulled up. Let's see here. Kareem Hunt 45.7% of the snaps last week to Pacheco's 32.9. Hunt had 11 carries to Pacheco's 9. Hunt ran 28.9% of the routes and saw 3 targets. Pacheco 17.8. Yeah, Hunt in every single one of these categories led Isiah Pacheco last week, which is kind of interesting. Do you just like Hunt better than Hunt is 5,200, Pacheco 5,700. Hunt projects better. Do you have a preference there?
Yeah, well, yeah, you got, I guess on the Roto Grinders projections, you have Hunt ahead. I still have Pacheco ahead, personally, but it's a really tough spot. I was really like, the first couple of weeks when Pacheco came back, you're like, oh, okay, like, it's understandable he's not getting the work, or they're working him up. But you would have figured in one of these past games that they would have that the load would have swung more in his favor than it has. And at this point, I'm thinking they're probably just not going to do that until the playoffs, because realistically, these games don't mean a lot to them. I mean, they're basically locked into the 1 seed more or less. So I'm worried that he's just never going to get like that 60-something% of the snaps and all the carries and targets. So it's a really tough spot for those two running backs. And like for me, I think it's just going to be a lot of Henry and a lot of Warren, and my flex spot is going to end up being none of them, like no other running backs. And I'm just not really going to be that interested in Pacheco and Hunt. If I had to pick one, I like Pacheco more. And it seems like people are going to play Hunt, even though like, I don't know. I still think Pacheco should be their starting running back. And even though they haven't shown that, I'm probably going to project it how I feel like they're going to play in a game that matters more so than what's happened in these past couple of weeks. That could be the wrong approach for it, but I think long term, we all see Pacheco as their main running back, and it's only a matter of time until he gets to that.
I guess then the question is, are they saving him for the playoffs? Like that's what people in chat are saying. That's what Steele's saying. They're going to continue to be cautious with Pacheco. Other people saying they're really saving him for the playoffs. You have any concern that could be the case, that they're just like, let's just save our better running back for when it really matters?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. Like that we were expecting him to get the snap share and the usage, and it just hasn't happened. And I figured at this point, with them more or less playing games that don't matter too much for them, like I don't think they're gonna just pull their starters or anything. Like they still do need to win, or Buffalo needs to lose a game. But yeah, I don't think that the usage is gonna like swing heavily in Pacheco's favor.
Okay.
They're saying Hunt. This other guy's saying Hunt has been getting the work because he looked better. I mean, maybe, but like he's also. I don't really know if Hunt has looked that good. I mean, he's averaging less than 4 yards a carry on the season and like huge volume. Like maybe Pacheco hasn't been that good, but Hunt is basically like a replacement level back.
Yeah. People really upset. People thought that Angelina Jolie was going to be on this stream with me. I should have just put up a picture for Jesse of Angelina Jolie or one of the avatars that Jesse has used on the screen, just to save some confusion. I'm not talking to nobody. He's just not on camera. Yeah. What would have been the best? Did you like my choice for the thumbnail? The young Angelina Jolie from the Hackers. I feel like that's one of your most like you've used that one for the longest, probably. You think that was
yeah? That's what people recognize me as, I guess, at this point. Yeah, that's probably like the go-to if you had to pick something. That would be the one.
And somebody asked if I have seen you, if I know what you look like. Yeah, that's exactly what he looks like. He looks like Angelina Jolie from Hackers. For those
I spend all my money on plastic surgery.
Yeah, I have seen a picture of Jesse one time. He posted it on Twitter. I saw it very briefly, and I barely remember what you look like. In my head, you look like a young Ben Rossa. That's how I picture you, based on the one picture I saw very briefly.
I could see that.
Yeah. All right. Any other run? Like, do you have any interest in Cordarrelle Patterson, Samaje Perine, anybody else?
Not on this slate. No, I mean we could maybe talk about them on the showdown stuff, but no.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on and talk about some wide receivers. 1 second. Oh, and I haven't said it yet. If you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, I would appreciate trying to get to 5,000 by the end of the NFL season. So could use some help. I need over 900 more people to subscribe by the end of the season. So if you have not already subscribed to the Flannelverse YouTube, would appreciate that support. All right, getting into receivers. Nico Collins kind of stands out as the best projected play on the slate at 8,300. Is he worth that price tag to you, Jesse?
Yes. Like short answer, yes. I have an even bigger gap than what you're looking at there in terms of like number 1 to number 2 receivers, and just like in terms of overall players, in terms of like even his projections even close to like Lamar for me. I mean, he's the only guy they got left. They're playing to win. There's really no question that he's the top play. Like you're not gonna really get any like shocking takes, I guess, out of me on this one, I don't think. But I would look to find ways to jam him in on a slate this big, or on a slate this small, just because there's so many other question marks that even if you pair him with a guy that gets you like 2 or 3, there's a chance that him plus that guy that only gets you 2 or 3 is going to outscore like the combination of Flowers and Pickens or Flowers and Worthy. I would say not even that there's a chance that's pretty likely. Like Nico Collins, yeah, he's just a really awesome play on this slate.
Yeah, I did a lot of it on Saturday, and it didn't really work out on Saturday, but it still kind of felt like lineups that had him were live, even when he only scored 13. I think that's going to be an outlier. Generally, he's going to put up better than 13 fantasy points. So I'm with you. I'm going to have a ton of Nico Collins here. And I think he's not projected for that much more than like 50% ownership either. So it seems like a great play. Let's talk about the Texans as a group, because we have Tank Dell out. So then we have John Mechie, we have Robert Woods, Xavier Hutchinson. Here's to your thoughts on who benefits from Tank Dell being out, if anybody.
Yeah, so I was kind of getting in the weeds on this a little bit, looking at their separation scores and stuff like that, and specifically by alignment, because we're trying to fill Tank Dell's position, which is mostly he runs routes out of the slot. So if you looked at like Mechie and Hutchinson, that nothing really stood out too much from them just on the surface, but they both play a lot better out of the slot, and I expect one of those two to take that role, not so much Robert Woods. So the real like thing, the real hard part is figuring out which one of them is going to get the majority of that role. Just in terms of like the player, I like John Mechie more, but I'm not the coach of their team, and I don't know who's going to line up in the slot for them more tomorrow. But I think one of them between Hutchinson and Mechie is going to be like a play that will probably the slate will probably hinge on one of them, because the Texans are going to be trailing a lot, and someone else is going to have to catch passes besides Nico Collins.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think John Mechie is my favorite of the group after Nico Collins. I just think he's better than Robert Woods. I think he's better than both Robert Woods and Xavier Hutchinson. And prior to last week when Mechie was out, he was running pretty clearly ahead of Xavier Hutchinson, and he was running ahead of Robert Woods. So yeah, same page. I think Mechie my favorite. You'll get to any Woods or Hutchinson?
Well, just based on what I was saying there, like I don't know if I want to say I group off Mechie and Hutchinson, but I think Robert Woods is pretty washed. But at the same time, they do seem to like him for like blocking and stuff like that, so he's going to be on the field. I still would prefer Hutchinson to Woods, but it'd be like Mechie, Hutchinson, Woods. Given that I don't know what the ownership looks like, I guess I could flip it over or I guess you don't have the ownership for it.
We don't have the ownership.
Yeah. The ownership, like I have just the blitz ownership, which is kind of it's whatever. It's not the best, but with all these secondary guys coming in kind of low right now, I think I would be open to taking shots on all of them, because it's hard to project who's going to get the usage, but we know someone has to get the usage, or at least the opportunity. Whether or not the ball comes their way or they do anything with it is another thing altogether. But two of those three guys are going to be on the field running a lot of routes. So, best of luck getting the right one. But I think one of them is likely to put up a score that will factor into GPPs tomorrow.
Yep. Same page. And not even pointing out that Tank Dell running more out wide. That is true. So we're Tank Dell leaving more routes out wide, but it's also a nice matchup for slot receivers, or not even like a great matchup, but it's a bad matchup overall. But slot receivers, like it's slightly better for slot receivers this year. It's like a top 12 matchup for slot receivers against Baltimore over the past 5 weeks. So that's like the best spot to attack. So yeah, I think I'm with you. Like all three are playable. Would you set, somebody in chat just asked, would you set a max one rule out of Mechie, Hutchinson, and Woods? I know you're just saying that you were thinking about it. Would you do it for the three of them?
Probably like a max 2 out of 3 would probably be more appropriate. I think one is probably a little too thin on a 2-game slate. If it was a bigger slate, yeah. I guess I'll go back to the slot route thing. I had just looked at it from the season perspective, and not like the last like 3 or 4 weeks or whatever. And after Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell was running the most routes out of the slot for the team, for the Texans, like over the season. So that's where I'd gotten that from.
Yeah.
But yeah, like in terms of slot route percentage, it looks like John Mechie is the highest on the team. So I guess I would feel more confident now in saying that John Mechie is probably going to be the main slot receiver. So I would put him on his own tier, and then probably max one of Hutchinson Woods would be the go-to for me.
Okay. Yep. That makes sense. The Ravens. So you've got Zay Flowers kind of standing out on his own. He has the next best projection of any receiver on the slate. Bateman projecting for over 10 at 4,800 looks okay too. We have Nelson Aguilar out, so people might have some interest in Tylan Wallace at 3,100. And And I think it's a pretty good matchup for receivers in general. Yeah, fourth best matchup for receivers against Houston over the past 5 weeks. So start where you want to. Zay Flowers, any interest there?
Yeah, so Zay Flowers is also questionable now. He was part
Yeah,
of the
good
injury
point. Good point.
report.
Yep.
That doesn't bother me if they say he's playing, but it may shrink his ownership a little bit
Good
for
point.
the slate, especially from casual players. They may just say, "Oh, I'll just play Pickens at that price," and they won't have the ability to change it after. And yeah, if he ends up not playing, you are going to be left with 1,600 on the table and a lot of Rashad Bateman, which obviously his value would go up in that case anyways. But yeah, I still like Zay Flowers quite a bit. I'm not that into Rashad Bateman, honestly, on this slate. His price is kind of coming up a little bit, which doesn't matter too much on such a small slate. But for me, I'm mostly interested in Zay Flowers, and then I'm really interested in Tylan Wallace, who was on the field quite a bit last week, and he's going to be the number 3 receiver again. He didn't run a ton of routes, but the team collectively didn't run a ton of routes. Like if you look at everyone's like snap share to route share, like Flowers is like 50 snaps to 20 routes, something like that. If you look at the coverage matchup on fantasy points, Tylan Wallace will stand out there as well, and they tend to have like plays for him, screens and whatnot, similar to Zay Flowers. You're gonna have to set the qualifier to like 10% of your snaps or whatever to get him in there.
I think somebody pointed out that if you just change it to all positions, then it for some reason that also does it for you. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, yeah. So he stands out there. His fantasy points per route run. Obviously, that comes with the caveat that he doesn't run a lot of routes typically. So that number is not going to be where it is if he plays more, because a lot of the time he would be on the field and they would have plays for him. That being said, he's the flat min, and he's probably going to play, 40-50% of the snaps at least. We're going to get to the tight ends too, but I think that Aguilar being out, something I didn't account for well last week, was that it probably increases Likely's opportunities because Aguilar is like the blocking receiver. And so instead of filling his role with another receiver, it just makes a lot of sense for them to go to more 2 tight end with Likely, who's kind of like a hybrid type player anyways.
Yeah, no, it's a good call. Yeah, Drew and Steele and I talked about that because we did the 2-game slate last week and talked about how much we love the tight ends. We were thinking that Bateman was going to be out too, so it was like, oh, they have Aguilar and Bateman out. They're going to go to more 2 tight ends. Ended up working out. Like I still had a lot of both of Andrews and Likely, and it worked out.
Yeah, they both scored.
Yeah, but maybe that still applies with just Aguilar out to some extent. That's good point. All right, so interested in Zay Flowers, less interest in Bateman, and then some interest in Tylan Wallace as I assume just like a large field dart throw. I assume you wouldn't play him in high stakes?
Yeah, I honestly might. Like it really, I've done some hand building, which I like to do just to get a perspective of like how other people a lot of people will build teams that way, and it is still hard to do like a Lamar, Henry, Collins, like if you don't play a 3K player. Now you can do it with like 2 tight ends, but if you're going to play Lamar, you kind of have the baked in correlation anyways there with Tylan Wallace. Like if Wallace is going to get a touchdown or bust a big play, like, Lamar is going to give him the ball. So in a situation where it allows me to get to like a lot of like the quote guaranteed points or whatever on a slate like this, I might play Tylan Wallace in high stakes. I haven't finalized that, so I'm not totally sure. It kind of depends what else it opens up. But I'm open to it, I will say.
Okay.
Even though he's only going to project for like
3 fantasy points or something?
Yeah, 3, 4, 5 points. But I'm open to it. But he's definitely a lot more fun, a lot more interesting in a large field.
Yeah. All right. We talked briefly about Pickens, I guess. Calvin Austin there on Pittsburgh, Van Jefferson. Obviously, with George Pickens back, it makes everybody else look worse on the Steelers. But I guess let's start with Pickens. How much interest do you have in $6,600 George Pickens?
Yeah, I mean, he's not on the injury report anymore. To me, that just means there's no worries at all. So the only like worry is the opposition. I already said how much I like Russell Wilson as a contrarian option on this slate, and for the same reason, I think I'll like George Pickens. I'm sure he'll be less contrarian than Russell Wilson, but like them together. I mean, if Russell Wilson's going to have a good day, George Pickens is going to be largely responsible for it.
Yeah.
So I like George Pickens quite a bit, specifically in the Steelers stack. But I'm not worried about him at all. I would be worried if you are interested in Calvin Austin, because it seems like his role basically evaporates with George Pickens in, and because they use Van Jefferson for a lot of the blocking and stuff like that, so he's on the field a lot. So for me, like George Pickens kind of kills their secondary options for the team. But I like George Pickens a lot on his own. I like him more than Zay Flowers this week, which I wouldn't have said last week.
Yeah, it doesn't completely kill Calvin Austin to me. It was kind of surprising me to see. So if you go back to Calvin Austin, the role pretty good the past 3 weeks. But if you go back to the last game that George Pickens played, which was week 13, Calvin Austin just 31.7% rep participation. But Scott pointed out, I think Calvin Austin got hurt in that week 13 game. So maybe weeks 10 through 12, where is like at least over 50% rep participation, maybe like a little bit more indicative of what we can at least hope for Calvin Austin. But then part of the reason that I still think like I'll have a little bit of interest is it's such a great matchup for slot receivers in particular. Second best matchup for slot receivers against Kansas City. You look at recent weeks slot route participation for the Steelers, and it's been Calvin Austin 56% of the time running from the slot. So like kind of a good matchup for him. I guess I haven't looked at the schematic matchup stuff.
I'd be curious. I'm looking at the usage or whatever that they had, and then the week before that, where Calvin Austin had the 23% snap share, the week before that, Van Jefferson only had a 26%. Did he get hurt that game? I wonder. That's maybe something I'll dig into a little bit more. Because if you are expecting Calvin Austin to play like 50-something% of the snaps and run a lot of routes, then I think he is more interesting than what I had originally expected. So yeah, I'm open. I'll dig into that one a little bit more. I'm open to Calvin Austin then.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm like a huge proponent of it. What about Van Jefferson? Do you have any interest there? Maybe you said already.
No, not really. I mean, like he's on the field a lot. He might luck into a touchdown, but like he's just the ball's just not coming his way.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like.
Sorry, I thought like last week I did have interest. I was like, okay, like this is the week where like, maybe a usage can spike for him with no one in, and it really didn't. Like nothing really changed, and they're like Ben Skoranek was like the leading receiver after the first quarter. It's like they really don't want to pass Jefferson the ball, so.
That did not last, at least. I was super into Van Jefferson last week. Skoranek, like early on, was like targeted over and over, but only up with 13% route participation. So it was like,
I think he got hurt.
Yeah.
On one of the catches, he like got hurt and he was like grabbing his shoulder or something.
Yeah, and he's I think out this week, or at least on the injury report this week also, which I guess benefits the other receivers there to some extent.
Yeah, he's out. Which actually, yeah, I mean. Because if you look at other weeks where Calvin Austin was kind of running a low snap share, like Skoranek was eating into that quite a bit. So yeah, that actually does matter. I didn't see Ben Skoranek was out, which is like a weird thing to even care about at this point in the season. But yeah,
on a 2-game, yeah,
but
yeah. What about Scotty Miller? Like he ran 42% of the routes last week, but you go back to when Pickens was active, he was not really running at all. So probably not. Yeah, I think it's probably like clearly George Pickens like is a strong play. Calvin Austin I would call playable. Jefferson in like a very large field GPP playable, and I think that's probably where I draw the line.
Yeah, I played some Mike Williams last week too.
Yeah, good point.
Like,
I mean, he's there.
Like it's just so weird. You would expect him to be better, and his role has been pretty consistent. Like with the Steelers, like with Pickens in, with Pickens out, it hasn't really mattered. That he seemed to be like getting his like 30% snaps or whatever, I imagine running routes on pretty much all of those or a lot of them. I don't know. The idea of Mike Williams is great. I don't know if I'm going to get there, but I could see having a few shares. Maybe more of a showdown thing though.
Yeah. Who knows? Like maybe like is his route participation better since Pickens has been out, but also maybe he like just got more acclimated with the team too to some extent. Yeah, I agree with you. Like he's maybe for a large GPP, but more definitely playable in Showdown at least.
I'd prefer him than Scotty Miller. I know they've basically been running about even, but if you think just about their like talent level and whatever, like I still think Mike Williams, even though he's not what he was,
still probably better than Scotty Miller.
Yeah.
On the Chiefs, we have Hollywood Brown back now. Xavier Worthy, the top projection of the Chiefs receivers. DeAndre Hopkins not that far behind, and then Hollywood Brown still doesn't project all the way, six fantasy points, but he saw 8 targets last week on just like 15 routes or something like that. So let's talk through the Kansas City receivers at all. Who do you think you have the most interest in? Who do you think you're going to play the most?
Yeah, so the Chiefs pass game as a whole is like a really interesting situation, like specifically now that Hollywood Brown is involved, because I think that not only does it open up him as a play, obviously, but I think that another thing that people may not have considered as much is like with Kelce not having the best year and Hopkins is kind of like hit or miss or whatever. The Chiefs haven't really had people that can like stretch the field at all, and now they have 2 guys that can like really that the defenses really have to account for, and in a way, I think that actually helps Hopkins and Kelce more than it helps Worthy and Hollywood Brown, because the defenses are going to be less focused on them because they're going to be more worried about getting burned over the top on one play. The ownership from the blitz has basically nothing for Hollywood Brown, and then Worthy and Hopkins are getting quite a bit, but that doesn't really align with like the target share that they got last week and in the Vegas props and all that kind of stuff. It kind of has them all about even. So for me, I'm pretty interested in Hollywood Brown if all this kind of holds out the way it does, even though he's probably not going to be on the field as much. It definitely seems like they're going to force feed him the ball when he is on the field.
Yeah, and also like who knows, like if that was just like a first game back, easing him in, and like they eased him in with 33% route participation, but also 8 targets. Like, I mean, if that route participation, like we could see that bump up to 50% here, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all.
I think that's fair.
So yeah, I'm with you. I have a lot of interest in Hollywood. Obviously Xavier Worthy, strong projection, strong option here. Also, are you? So I know you said that you think that Hollywood's presence maybe helps Kelce and Hopkins more, but do you still have any interest in playing some Worthy?
I do, but I think like the ownership on him and Hopkins is pretty close, but I think that when we turn the cards over tomorrow, that Worthy is going to be owned probably a good amount more than Hopkins. Hopkins, like in terms of his like yards, props, and stuff like that, is lower than Worthy and even Hollywood Brown. But to me, I think that it's kind of hard to predict where the ball is going to go on an individual Chiefs slate, and I always like tend to lean to the guys that the field doesn't really want. So for me, Worthy's probably going to be the one that I'm lower on, and Hopkins will probably be the one that I'm higher on of those two.
Okay. Daniels asks, Worthy, Brown, Hopkins, Kelce, would you set a max 2 in non-Mahomes lineups?
That's tough. I think that's probably how I would have it set up. It's but yeah, I think I would probably set it up that way, but it is only a 2-game slate, so I don't think you necessarily have to be as restrictive as you would on a larger slate.
Yeah, it's like I probably won't set that rule. I think it's a fine. Like I probably won't in a 150 set. I think if you're playing 20 lineups, it makes more sense to set those kinds of rules. But on a 2-game slate, I'm really not that restrictive with my rules in general on 2-game slates. I allow for them to get pretty weird because that's kind of how you avoid dupes on large field stuff. But yeah, maybe in a smaller field, or if you're just not playing that many lineups, you want to be more rules oriented, and I think that would be a fine one to set in that case.
Yeah, with those types of rules too, you tend to want to think about like the offense that they're in. like a rule like that would be more appropriate for, say, the Steelers than it would be for the Chiefs, where like Mahomes could easily like pass for 300 plus yards, 3 or 4 touchdowns, and a lot of those guys could get there. Whereas like the Steelers, it's pretty thin to like expect Russell Wilson to pass for 300 plus and get Pickens there and like Van Jefferson and Mike Williams and Freiermuth. Like that's a way heavier ask of that team. So I think that when you're setting rules like that are restrictive, you want to be cognizant of the teams that you're setting them for.
Yeah. Very, very good note there. Makes more sense for a team like Pittsburgh. You're just not expecting that much scoring, but Kansas City could just be a lot of scoring. And it could be also like both Kelce and Hopkins can just rack up PPR points. So like even without scoring touchdowns, they could get the PPR, and then you get Hollywood scoring the touchdown, whatever. So yeah, that'd be less restrictive there. The only other Chief I wanted to mention, Justin Watson, one target last week, but it was a near long touchdown, which on a gross 2-game slate, like that might be enough. He also has a great coverage grade here. I don't know, for the largest field, if you're 150 maxing a large field, would you think you'd have any Justin Watson?
Yeah, he's kind of like the NFL version of like a model darling, where it's like if you look at any sort of like advanced stats or like stuff like that, he seems to look good, and then the ball just never comes his way ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, on like a large slate, just given his like route participation and everything, and I mean, with a guy like that, it could just be like a 140-yard touchdown. He's optimal on a 2-game slate. On a big slate, I wouldn't go there. On this slate, I'll definitely leave him in, and if I get him, I get him, and if I don't, I don't. But I'd sooner play him than like Juju or whatever other trash they have down there if they have more receivers.
Yep. Think we're on the same page there. Any other receivers that we have not talked about? Tez Walker, I guess, theoretically could be playable, but I don't think he really did anything last week to show that he would be playable here. I guess if Zay Flowers is out, but then Tylan Wallace I think would be the priority.
Yeah, Tylan Wallace will be mega chalk if Flowers is out. There's not really. We touched on everyone that's going to be relevant.
Okay, let's move on. Talk about tight ends here, and I'll say I have a lot of interest in tight ends. I think I'm going to be doing a lot of double tight end on this slate. Do you have any thoughts at this point of how much double tight end you're going to get to?
No, I expect to get a lot of them just because in general they are pretty efficient, like point per dollar plays, like on any slate really. Like the bigger slates, you sometimes don't want to have like two of like the cheaper tight ends. Like you want to have, if you're going to have two, you kind of want to have one of like the receivery tight ends. But on a slate like this, there's just not a lot of good options to save money, and tight ends are pretty often like the better point per dollar plays. So yeah, I expect that not only will I have a lot of 2 tight ends, but like the 2 tight ends will actually be like pretty common for tomorrow's slate.
You're probably right about that. Yeah. All right, let's start with the Chiefs. So we've got Kelce and Noah Gray, I think, are both in play. Kelce 5,300, best projected tight end on the slate. How much Kelce do you think you're gonna get to?
Yeah, Kelce. Well, we were talking about the Chiefs receivers, and honestly, I think we should have just had Kelce in there. I know he's labeled as a tight end, but I don't really like see him that way. He is a tight end, but he catches enough passes to kind of qualify on the other side. I like him probably more than I like any of the receivers, for like a few reasons. Like one being that a lot of people are going to do double tight end, and they're going to use those 2 tight ends to save money. So I think Kelce could go overlooked again, like he did last week. He's also just hasn't like really had like a game where people are like, man, like that's like the old Kelce or whatever. He hasn't really done anything to like capture the field's attention, like from a casual perspective. And like I touched on earlier with Worthy and now Hollywood Brown stretching the field, it's going to be harder for defenses to, give a lot of attention to Kelce. And I think that's going to help him have better games going forward than he's had for like the majority of the season.
All right, so you like Kelce, man, 5,300, nice price tag there on Kelce.
Yeah.
Also, haven't looked at the. I do have this up already. Kelce, the schematic matchup looks like it's slight positive there for Kelce. Defense against Pittsburgh been good. What are we laughing at? Somebody in chat?
Oh, there's
Steele.
They're bringing up politics stuff.
Yeah.
I bring some baggage with me, Neil. Okay, like it is what it is.
I accept the baggage of my guess. As long as you bring the good DFS analysis, I don't care about the baggage.
I'm not bringing that stuff onto the show, but if other people bring it, then it is what it is.
I mean, it's just a funny comment.
Yeah. No.
All right. So Kelce looks great. No Gray, any interest there? Also 4 targets per game over the past 5 weeks. He's been pretty good.
He's been pretty good, but I think people like he had that little stretch where he's kind of outperforming Kelce, and it seems like his role is kind of getting reduced in the last few weeks as Hollywood Brown has been integrated. Well, I mean, he's only been here for the 1 week, but over the last few weeks, Gray's role is coming down a little bit. And I think if you think about the packages that they're going to run, if they're going to do 3 receiver, it's going to be Hopkins, Worthy, Brown, and Watson will be mixed in. And then Kelce's going to be your tight end with whatever back. So I think Gray, his time seems like it's kind of come and gone, and he's still relevant, but I think he's less relevant than people think he is, because he had such a great stretch in the middle of the season when a lot of people were banged up and he was playing more, getting more balls, that I'm not that interested in him this week.
So, I mean, it was last week that he only saw 1 target. Prior to that, the route share had come down. He still saw 4 targets in week 15.
Yeah.
But you think that this is maybe the Hollywood Brown effect, that they're just not going to use him as much. They're going to get it to the receivers more.
Yeah, if you're looking at the chart there, and you do see the route shares coming down week by week by week. And yeah, he got the targets. I mean, if a guy's going to run 30-40% of the routes, he's definitely in play to get the 3 or 4 or 5, targets. But if you're just thinking about it, if you're looking at it from 100 simulations of it or whatever, the more his routes come down, the less targets he's likely going to see. And I think that's a trend where he's going to play less as these other receivers are more integrated into the offense. So I'm not that interested in Noah Gray this week.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Dalton Schultz, and this is I think it depends on where you look the projections here, but RotoGrinders says Dalton Schultz, the next best projected tight end, could benefit from John Mechie being out. The matchup is middling for tight ends against Baltimore. How much interest do you have in Dalton Schultz?
Yeah, I thought he was not that great of a play last week. He was a lot cheaper though. But now you have another key target out. I don't really know how much CJ Stroud likes throwing to him, because it seems like this whole year it's been, other than last week, it's been where is Dalton Schultz? But at this point, they're so thin for reasonable pass catching threats, and we expect them to be trailing in this game. So I think he's a lot better play this week than he was last week. He's probably my 3rd tight end, but with so many lineups likely being 2 tight end, I'm sure I'll still have a lot of him this week.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of the same page. He's not my favorite of the tight ends, but he's a pretty strong tight end option. Like you said, 8 targets last week, just 4 the week prior to that. He does have a couple more 7 target games in recent weeks. Yeah, I don't know. It feels like he's been underwhelming relative to my expectations, but until last week, of course, when I did not play him. But yeah, I think he looks like a strong option. Maybe a little bit more upside with Tank Dell out. Mark Andrews, 4,300. I'll open up to you. How much interest do you have in Mark Andrews?
Yeah, I think, Mark Andrews, I might as well just talk about Andrews and Likely together. And
yeah,
we kind of touched on, or I kind of touched on with the Aguilar being out again. I do think the Ravens will lean into more of the 2 tight end sets than they may have, even though they do like 2 tight ends anyways. And Charlie Kohler, I believe, is still out, who was their 3rd tight end, which is another plus for those 2 guys, getting them a lot more snaps on the field, a lot more routes. Not that Kohler was a pass threat, but just having those guys on the field even more is good for both of them. Yeah, I was big on Mark Andrews coming into the year. I thought he was fully healthy. Obviously, after that first week, the opinion completely flipped and everyone was crazy about Isaiah Likely. But it seems like Andrews is he realistically is the number 2 receiver on this team, in my opinion, not Rashad Bateman. And I'm going to be heavy on Lamar, and I feel like I'm gonna be a little low on Zay Flowers, even though I like him. So I feel like Lamar, I'm gonna have a lot of Lamar with like 2 tight ends, or maybe just a lot of Lamar with a lot of Mark Andrews, and then Derrick Henry might be in there as well. But yeah, I like Mark Andrews quite a bit this week.
Yeah, I think all things point to Mark Andrews being a great play this week. As you noted, the 5 targets per game over the past 4 weeks. The route participation, I think, even better in recent weeks. This is over the past 4 games. It's at 64%, which is pretty good, but much better than early years. And what I had pulled up before is the slot route participation over the past 4 games. 78% of his routes are from the slot for Mark Andrews, and you can see on the over the past 5 weeks, schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. It is 3rd best matchup for split out tight ends, which Scott Barrett explained to me. This is essentially just means running from the slot. So great matchup for tight ends split out, which is what Mark Andrews has been doing against Houston. So yeah, everything, and he's fairly inexpensive, so everything looks pretty good there.
Yeah, and if you
also go ahead.
Sorry, if you flip back to that the route, the other one that you were looking at before with the fantasy points sheet that you were looking at before this one. If you look at the slot route participation, you see the number 2 in there is Nelson Aguilar, which is the hole that they have to fill between it'll likely be Likely and Andrews doing most of that. So yeah, I think a lot of like Ravens 2 tight ends. I don't know how popular that'll be together, but I think it's a pretty good spot to go both of them for this week in particular, just because you need the money, and I also think that they're both pretty high upside plays this week.
Yeah. With you on both. I think Andrews might be my favorite tight end on the slate. Likely still a very strong option. Pat Freiermuth, we get George Pickens back, but it's also a nice matchup for tight ends against Kansas City. It is a top 7 matchup for tight ends against Kansas City. So the matchup is pretty good for Freiermuth. How much interest do you have there at what's his price? He's 3,900.
Yeah, so I mean he's probably in terms of projections, he's like my 5th tight end, but I imagine I'll have more of him than I probably will end up with more of him than Likely, just because of my interest in Russell Wilson. I don't know. The tight ends, I think all the tight ends, the receivers are kind of dicey this week, in my opinion. I'm not super high on Flowers. I'm not super high on Worthy. I like pretty much all the tight ends that we can expect to play a reasonable amount, aside from Noah Gray. So I like Freiermuth a good amount. He's not really much of a downfield threat. It's kind of the one thing. I feel like he gets a lot of his points. I guess all tight ends are not really downfield threats. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, he's going to have a good PPR game, but they are going to be trailing. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have any hot takes for the tight ends. I like the 5 most expensive ones. You can kind of just pick and choose which ones you like more based on which quarterback you have in the lineup. Would really be the only deciding factor for me, other than Kelce is clearly better than the others. Yeah, no, yeah, I think the top 5. I think I still have a little bit more interest than you do in Noah Gray, but yeah, the top 5 bigger priorities. And we kind of like them all. They all. You can kind of make a case for any of them. Do you want to rank them for me? Those top 5. Top 5, okay. Probably Kelce, Andrews, Schultz, Likely, Freiermuth.
Okay, I think I would go Andrews, Kelce, Schultz, Freiermuth, Likely. I don't know. It's pretty close. We like them all. I think it comes down to we like the tight ends here. Yeah, the tight end, it really just comes down to we like the tight ends, or I guess I think you agree, but I think we like the tight ends more than the 4 to 5K or the high 4K to low 4K receiver range. I think we like the tight ends way more than any of the receivers in that area, and we're both seems like we're going to play a ton of 2 tight end. Brandon says if there's no Petrie or Ward for nickel, then the Texans might be screwed. So that would be a benefit too. I mean, the Ravens are just going to be able to put up points, I think, on the Texans regardless. But yeah, it could be rough out there. Defenses, kickers. Do you have any hot takes here? Yeah, I was gonna ask you before our show. Do you even talk about defenses on? Not usually. Especially on a 2-game slate. I mean,
whatever. The real thing to talk about is like how many players do you allow against the defense? Like for me, I think I leave it at like 3 on a slate this size. I don't know if you go more than that or less
I
than
move it up
that.
to 5 usually. Just like whatever. I'll just open it up. But I don't know what the right answer is there either. I've thought about just doing like 3. It probably 5 is too much because like at some point, if they're scoring that much, even a pick 6 is gonna, unless they get 2, I guess. I don't know. It's tough to know exactly, but certainly at least 3 against your defense is totally fine.
Yeah, I figured we would touch on that because maybe other people might not even change the setting in their thing and have like 0, or
Right.
or maybe they're like, oh, I don't know, like maybe 1 is good, but like 2 might be too much. Like you can definitely be weirder than you think you can on, especially on a slate like this. Is basically what I'm trying to get across for people that are watching.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like a lot of people probably just want to build like the standard builds like you do on a main slate, and it's like, no, the settings are pretty damn different for me in terms of what I'll allow my lineups to look like. I don't know. Chiefs defense, I guess, looks pretty good against the Steelers. I don't have any strong takes here. I'll set a cap at like 30% probably and get to at least 10% of every defense, just have them mixed in.
Yeah,
but I don't.
And they're all like the same price too, so it's not even like really like I kind of wish they did make the pricing a little more drastic on the defenses, because then you could like have like more of like an opinion or whatever, I guess. But
yeah,
it's just basically just like whatever one works for your team that you don't have 6 guys playing against. It's like that's it. Like there's nothing really brilliant to say about it.
Yeah. All right. Should we take a brief look at do you want to build a lineup real quick and then we'll take a 5-minute look at each showdown?
Yeah, we can. You said you've got to go in like 5 minutes, don't you? Or I don't know what your hard out is, so
probably 10. I need to be out. Need to be out by 10 minutes from now.
So you just guide us wherever you think is best to go with this 10 minutes.
All right. Well, it sounds like we like Mark Andrews. Let's do a double tight end with Andrews and Likely.
Okay.
And then probably just throw Lamar in there, or I guess we can see whether we are led to a Russ lineup here. At wide receiver, we both like Hollywood Brown.
Well, if I'm doing the double, well, I guess I'm not going to set the rules to prevent it, but I think if you're going to handle the double tight end, I feel like it'd feel wrong to not have Lamar in there.
Yeah, I think I agree with you.
But yeah, like if in terms of like my optimizer rules, I would let it slide even without Lamar. But
do you want to throw Mechie into this one, or Tylan Wallace maybe, since it's Lamar lineup?
Yeah, well, I think we could start with Mechie. We already got like we got 2 pass catchers already, and there's like a decent chance so Henry could end up in this lineup too. So maybe we'll skip Tylan Wallace.
I think overall the Chiefs are probably my favorite defense against Russ.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm going to end up with like a lot of Chiefs and Steelers defense, just whatever the salary calls for on that given team.
So now we could play Henry and Mixon here if we want to.
Yeah.
Or would you rather play Nico Collins and one of the cheaper running backs?
Well, why don't we just click? Can you click in the whole thing, or like what's the rules on that? I don't know what there rules for building the lineup? Like I don't know. I know there's like DraftKings has like certain rules about stuff, so I don't know if there's any.
Oh, I mean, we can build. I mean, like I'm not like. I don't know. Yeah. Just kind of playing around with ideas for the lineups.
Okay.
I usually do click in the whole thing just to see what they look like, but then I like play around with it just to see like what looks better.
Well, I don't know. I mean, just click in like Henry and Mixon and see what it gives us for receiver. I think it leaves us in like a weird spot receiver wise. I don't know. Actually,
George Pickens fits in there. Zay Flowers, Xavier Worthy.
I mean, you really
quite
can't
enough for Nico.
Yeah, I feel like Flowers might be a little too much if you did this, but so you could do that, or if you take out Mixon and put in Collins, I guess that'll leave us with like a lot of salary, I think. But
then we can put in Pacheco or Warren. Then we leave just 700 on the table.
Yeah, I would. I like this. I would also. We like Hollywood Brown. I wouldn't hate. I think you can get to Hopkins here too, which would be another reasonable option. There's actually like I think I built like a team to enter into contest, and I think it looks like exactly like this pretty much.
I mean, it's a pretty. I mean, it's based like what we talked about on the show, and it's a pretty strong lineup. Yeah, Hollywood could be upgraded here to Hopkins if you don't want to leave a lot of salary on the table. But yeah, I think that looks like a pretty strong.
Bateman if you want to go for like a 35 to something like super onslaught team.
Mega Raven slot. Yeah. All right.
Or if you're like really a Worthy guy with that, you could drop Likely down to Wallace. I think you'd be able to get Brown up to Worthy if that's your cup of tea there.
True.
But yeah, I mean, I can't say that's going to be exactly my team, but I'm pretty sure my single entry team is going to look a decent amount like that team that we just built, unless I get into a little too much alcohol and end up with Russell Wilson or something. But
yeah. All right. Let's spend a couple minutes on the Kansas City Pittsburgh showdown, and I think let's see if they have ownership projections for this one. No, okay. So it's kind of worthless to do this without ownership projections. So I don't really know what the ownership is going to look like. I suspect we're still going to get Hollywood at pretty low ownership at 6,600. So he's going to be somebody that I would like in showdown. Do you think you're gonna have interest in kickers and defenses on the showdown slate?
Yeah, I mean, like it really, like you said with the ownership thing, it really just comes down to where people are at with that. I think that the defenses, if like the game is anything other than like the game last night where there's like a massive total, the defenses are usually a reasonable option. Kickers, pretty much never. Pittsburgh, if you really want to get into the weeds of something, Pittsburgh is not a great place to kick in, and I'm guessing it's going to be pretty cold. So like 50+ yard kicks and Heinz Field is traditionally one of the harder places. So if you really want to like give them a downgrade or whatever, I'm never really a kicker guy anyways, but I would be even less keen to play kickers in this game specifically.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm not seeing ownership that actually works anywhere else either. So it's tough to do this without ownership. We can play around with the lineup, I guess. Let's just do that since it's like I don't know that I have any hot takes without knowing the ownership. It's really hard to do this. Right. I suspect Hollywood's going to be low, but we don't really know that.
Well, I came on the show to do one thing for touting, and that's to tout Darnell Washington, who,
hell yeah,
I think we need him to at least be in the showdown lineup. I was gonna tout. We didn't really get to him in main slate because all the tight ends are so good on main slate, but he is literally this like the stone min on the main slate, and he's on the field like a decent amount. He's a huge dude that can catch touchdowns. He might literally only catch one pass, but I mean the route share for a guy that's 2,500 is not brutal. The 1 week it was, but
yeah. Remember, like the first game Russ came in, he was like targeting him over and over on the side of the field. Like his route share came up for a little while, and it dropped a little bit recently. But yeah, I think that's like playable maybe on the main slate. But yeah, that's a good call out at least for the showdown slate.
It's it's pretty fringe on the main slate, but I wouldn't prevent it from showing up or whatever. And especially with the fact that I like Russell Wilson, I'm sure I'm going to get some shares of Washington. But yeah.
Who would be your preferred captain here?
I mean, I think it'd be. I don't really tend to like quarterbacks in the captain unless they have rushing upside, which these guys do. So I feel like if we're gonna get if you're talking about like the chalk of the chalk, it's obviously Mahomes. But I think if you want to get freaky, I think I would look at Russ Wilson as your captain, or maybe Travis Kelce as your captain for this contest.
Let's try a Russ. We've already got John L. Washington there. I want at least a double stack with Russ. Who else would you want to put in here?
Well, we might as well get Pickens, and we can get weird with something else down the line because I mean, I guess salary is not really too much of a concern with this.
Yeah, Washington's cheap enough that helps. Would this be one? How about Kansas City defense to make this weird? Double stack against the opposing defense, and then you can do whatever you want with your last two picks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down with it. Like, I might as well. I mean, and honestly, it's not as like negatively correlated as you'd think to have like, because if the quarterback is going to be optimal through passing, then that's going to give the defense more opportunities to score via interceptions and sacks. So it's actually like, it seems like a negative correlation, but it's really not that like strange of a you can see the scenario where both hit is what I'm trying to say.
Yep, agreed. Do I want to throw Mahomes in here? We could do Worthy, Kelce. We can play literally whoever else we want in this lineup.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well it's just Mahomes, and then like take your pick at what like target like receiver you want with him. Is you can just like I would definitely I wouldn't take Worthy because I think that's like the obvious one to go to, and you could go Kelce. I mean, you could even conceivably go Hopkins or even Brown. You could go as far down as you wanted to, really, and just leave the
Yeah.
money on the table. But I mean, with him captain, with Russ Wilson captain against Chiefs defense and Darnell Washington, you're already like pretty unique, I would imagine.
My concern with going too far down, like going down to Hollywood Brown, if we did that instead of Kelce, I mean, that might actually still, that's maybe not so bad. But it's just like if you're leaving 2,700 on the table, then you need Darnell Washington to outscore everybody up to 4,300, which maybe that's actually not so bad.
It's really not that unrealistic. I mean,
it's not.
And like you're playing for like outlier scenarios in a showdown. Anyway, would I put this in the 3K? No, I wouldn't. No. Would I put it in the $15? Sure. I mean, why not? Like, so it's still a reasonable team for that.
We need the Chiefs defense to outscore Jalen Warren, Najee Harris, which again I think is plausible, because we're already betting on the passing game being the way it goes anyway. So I think this could work.
I think the most like the thinnest part of it is Hollywood Brown outscoring all the other targets above him. Like, honestly.
That's probably true, but not that thin. Like he got 8 targets last week, so certainly possible. All right, and then let's do one more real quick. Just build a lineup for the Texans slate, and then I got to get out of here.
Yeah, I actually had one more weird shout out for this slate specifically too, and it's Irv Smith. Now, he didn't run a lot of routes, but when you think of Irv Smith, you don't think of him as a blocking tight end. He's been on the field quite a bit, like the last couple of weeks. Let me see what his routes were. Yeah, so he was on the field for 18 out of 59 plays, just like about a third. He only ran 8 routes, but what is his price on that site? I know he's the min on the main. So where is his price out?
This is Snapshare report. Where is he? Why is he not popping up?
He's on the Texans.
I have the wrong. Oh yeah, good call. Wait, Irv Smith is on the Texans?
Yeah, he just got picked up.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay. He was on the Chiefs previously, right?
I
think he was.
He was on the Bengals. I don't know if he was on the Chiefs. No, well, I know he's not good at football.
Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. Okay.
I know he's not good at football, but I know he also is not a blocking tight end traditionally. And
31. That's actually a good call out. 46% and 31% the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, and then with Tank Dell injury too. I mean, I don't know how they're going to play it, but you could see pathways to like a little more double tight end, a little more Irv Smith on the field. He's playing enough that I think he's relevant anyways.
I know that he was on. People saying he was on Minnesota. I know that he was on Minnesota, but not this year. I thought that he had been okay. Anyway, whatever.
And someone else saying Stover was out, but also the first week when Stover was in, Irv Smith was still. I mean, he played 17 plays in week 13. I don't know what's the route share in week 13. Neil, you had the route share.
The route share in week 13. Route share report week 13.
Now we have Steelers in there.
Oh, yep. Yes, we do.
How did that happen? It must be a different.
Yeah, different tab looks like. Stover 21%, Irv Smith 3% in that game.
Yeah, so that's not ideal, but
is Stover back for this game? Do we know?
That's what someone in chat said.
Okay.
So maybe it's less interesting, but I mean at the same token, you could just flip what I'm saying about Irv to Stover, who's even cheaper.
True.
So
is he really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if Stover is back, maybe we flip this to Stover instead. Yeah, what's the note? Full participant. Okay, so he's probably back.
Yeah. So
you know what? He had an appendectomy. Okay, interesting.
Just take what I said about Irv Smith and just throw it over to Stover. Realistically, I mean, I don't really think it's that much of a different thing.
All right, and then we'll fill out do we want to go Collins, Henry, or Lamar at captain?
I think in terms of being weird, Henry's probably going to be the weirdest of the captains. But I'm open to anything really. Let's do Henry. Let's make it a little weird.
All right. Now we have. Oh, I did that the wrong spot.
Okay.
All right. So now we have 81.50 left per player. So we got to find value somewhere. Do we want to go Mark Andrews as a likely?
Yeah, do we have
Mechie.
to I like to kind of fill out the top end. Like
Okay.
if we're gonna do with Henry, like I think we should do or if we're gonna do if we're gonna do Henry, we probably want like Collins. We probably want to do the Collins Stroud combo, I would imagine, if you're expecting Henry to run the ball a lot.
Yep.
And then I guess this might end up being like a Lamar fade type team you could do.
Probably, unless probably Lamar fade. So then Zay Flowers, Bateman.
Yeah, I mean, we can even do like Andrews. You could do like Andrews and Tucker, and it leaves a little on the table if we're really keen on Andrews.
That's interesting. Yeah, leaves 1,000 on the table. That works.
And then you get like the one touchdown to Andrews. Henry runs for 100 and a touchdown. They kick some field goals. Other team is trailing. Kind of like you said, like people say, and it does ring true that you want your team to tell a bit of a story. Like it's really more important than like, oh, I got to stand on this guy, I got to stand on that guy for showdown. You kind of want the lineup to have a cohesion, but at the same time be unique at the same time.
Yeah, good call. All right, Jesse, really appreciate you coming on the show. I got to get out of here. I got to get to Christmas Eve. Where can people find you? Do you have any other public appearances coming up anytime soon?
No, I like to keep them. I like tweeted the thing that I was going to come on there, and it was like the most like tweet I've had in a long time. Like I don't know, people like to see me on shows or whatever, but at the same time, I feel like if I show up on too many shows, the allure is kind of gone.
Lose
so I
the
like to just do
excitement,
like one every like 6 months or whatever. So I don't know. My
See you in
Twitter
6
handle.
months.
My Twitter handle is downside of me with a 0. Same thing on Blue Sky if you're a woke lib like me. But that's about it.
Downside of me with a 0.
Yeah,
on the socials. Yep. I am Player Q DFS on the socials. All right, that's going to do it. I got to get out of here. Thank you, Jesse, for hanging out. Thank you all for hanging out throughout this show. If you're watching after the fact, appreciate you also. If you would subscribe to the channel, I would, of course, appreciate it. Liking the video always helps. Commenting, all of that helpful for the algorithm. Thanks, guys. I will catch you later.